The call came at 6:47 a.m. on Friday, 5th September 2025. Keir Starmer was still in bed at Downing Street when his phone buzzed with the message that would define his worst week as Prime Minister. Sir Laurie's report is in. It's not good. Angela wants to speak to you. The Prime Minister sat up, his wife Victoria stirring beside him. He knew what was coming. He'd known for days, but knowing doesn't make it hurt any less. By lunchtime, his deputy Prime Minister would be gone. His housing secretary would resign. His deputy party leader would step down, and the woman many saw as his natural successor, the bridge between Labour's warring factions, the working-class voice that balanced his lawyer's precision, would walk out of government with her reputation in tatters. Angela Rayner's political career hadn't just hit a speed bump. It had crashed into a wall built from her own words, her own principles, her own relentless attacks on others who'd done exactly what she'd now done herself. The hypocrisy wasn't just damaging, it was career-ending, and Keir Starmer, 14 months after the biggest election victory in Labour's modern history, was about to learn that governing is far harder than winning. To understand how Angela Rayner fell, you need to understand how high she'd climbed. Born in Stockport in 1980, she left school at 16, pregnant, and with no qualifications. She became a care worker, then a trade union representative, fighting for the rights of people society had forgotten. Her accent was thick, Northern English. Her style was combative. Her politics were unashamedly left-wing. She was everything the metropolitan Labour elite wasn't, and that made her powerful. When Jeremy Corbyn led Labour, Rayner was his loyal deputy. When Keir Starmer took over, she stayed on, winning the deputy leadership contest in a landslide. She was the link between Corbyn's grassroots movement and Starmer's professional operation. Without her, Labour would have torn itself apart. With her, it won 411 seats. Rayner wasn't just deputy PM, she was the housing secretary, tasked with solving Britain's chronic housing crisis. She spoke about building affordable homes, protecting tenants, ending homelessness. She was passionate, authentic, real, and she was absolutely merciless towards anyone who dodged tax, exploited loopholes, or played the system. That's what made what happened next so devastating. The story began, not in September 2025, but in May. Angela Rayner and her partner purchased an £800,000 flat in Hove, a trendy seaside town on England's south coast. It was a beautiful property, modern, spacious, perfect for a deputy prime minister who needed somewhere outside London. But there was a problem, a legal one, a tax one. When you buy property in the UK, you pay stamp duty land tax. It's a straightforward transaction tax. But there's a surcharge if you own more than one property, an additional 3% on top of the standard rate. For an £800,000 property, that surcharge amounts to about £40,000. Angela Rayner owned multiple properties. Her constituency home, in Ashton-under-Lyne, where her disabled child lived in a trust arrangement, a grace and favour flat at Admiralty House in central London, provided by the government, and now this new property in Hove. By any reasonable interpretation, she should have paid the surcharge, but she didn't. She paid the standard rate, and when asked about it, she said she'd received legal advice that she didn't need to pay more. That answer might have worked for someone else. For Angela Rayner, it was political suicide, because Angela Rayner had spent years building her reputation on attacking exactly this kind of behaviour. In 2018, she'd gone after Jeremy Hunt, then Health Secretary, for using a Tory tax loophole to save nearly £100,000 in stamp duty. She called it sleaze. She demanded answers. She said the Conservative Party was corrupt. In 2023, she'd hounded Nadhim Zahawi, the former Chancellor, when he admitted paying nearly £5 million to settle his tax affairs. She called for his resignation, said he'd betrayed public trust, said politicians must meet the highest standards. Every time a Conservative minister had a tax issue, Angela Rayner was there, furious, righteous, uncompromising, and now she'd done the same thing. The hypocrisy was so perfect, so complete, that even her supporters struggled to defend her. The tabloids smelled blood. The Telegraph ran the headline, Rayner's £40,000 tax dodge. The Daily Mail called her Red Angers the hypocrite. Even The Guardian, sympathetic to Labour, questioned her judgment. But Rayner doubled down. I paid what I was told to pay, she insisted. I followed legal advice. I've done nothing wrong. For 3 weeks, that line held. Keir Starmer backed her publicly. Angela has acted with integrity, he told Parliament. Labour MPs rallied round. The story seemed to be fading, and then on 28 August, everything changed. A senior tax barrister, Dan Nidal, published a detailed analysis. He wasn't politically motivated. He'd defended Rayner before, but his conclusion was devastating. Based on the publicly available facts about her property arrangements, her trust set up for her disabled child, and the timing of the sale of her previous home, she should have paid the surcharge. The legal advice she'd relied on was inadequate. She should have sought specialist tax counsel, especially given her role as housing secretary and the complexity of her family situation. Nidal's analysis went viral. Accountants agreed, tax lawyers concurred. Even Labour-supporting experts admitted she'd made a mistake. The pressure became unbearable. On 3rd September, Angela Rayner finally admitted it. I acknowledge that due to my reliance on advice from lawyers, which did not properly take account of these provisions, I did not pay the appropriate stamp duty at the time of the purchase. It was a confession, carefully worded, technically accurate, but a confession nonetheless. She immediately referred herself to Sir Lawrie Magnus, the independent advisor on ministerial standards. It was the right move, the only move, but everyone knew what was coming. Sir Laurie's investigations don't end well for ministers who've broken the rules. Keir Starmer now faced an impossible choice: stand by his deputy and look weak, distance himself and look disloyal. He tried to thread the needle. I have full confidence in Angela, he said on Wednesday evening. She's acted properly by referring herself to the independent advisor, but when pressed on whether he'd sack her if the report was damaging, he refused to answer. I'll wait for the report, he said. That hesitation told everyone what they needed to know. Angela Rayner was on her own. The next 48 hours were agony for everyone involved. Rayner stayed at her Hove flat, away from Westminster. Starmer held emergency meetings with his closest advisors. Labour MPs split into camps. Some defended Rayner fiercely. She made a mistake, but she's been honest, said one backbencher. Others were quietly relieved. She's always been difficult to manage, a minister admitted privately. Maybe this is an opportunity for Keir to reset. Friday morning brought Sir Lawrie Magnus's report. It was clinical, devastating, professional. He acknowledged that Rayner had acted with integrity and with a dedicated and exemplary commitment to public service. He accepted she'd acted in good faith. But then came the killer blow. I consider, however, that her unfortunate failure to settle her SDLT liability at the correct level, coupled with the fact that this was established only following intensive public scrutiny, leads me to advise you that, in relation to this matter, she cannot be considered to have met the highest possible standards of proper conduct as envisaged by the Ministerial Code. In bureaucratic language, that was a death sentence. The Ministerial Code demands the highest possible standards. Sir Lawrie had concluded she hadn't met them. Therefore she'd breached the code, and ministers who breached the code resign or are sacked. There was no third option. At 9:30 a.m., Angela Rayner called Keir Starmer. The conversation lasted 17 minutes. Neither has revealed what was said, but sources close to both suggest it was emotional, difficult, and final. By 10:15 a.m., Rayner's resignation letter was being drafted. By 11:47 a.m., it was public. Given the findings and the impact on my family, I have therefore decided to resign as Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, as well as Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, she wrote. The letter was remarkable for what it revealed about the pressure she'd been under. While I rightly expect proper scrutiny on me and my life, my family did not choose to have their private lives interrogated and exposed so publicly. It was a cry of pain from a woman who'd spent 3 weeks being torn apart by media scrutiny. Starmer's response was equally emotional. In a handwritten note, he wrote, I am very sad to be losing you from the government. You are a trusted colleague and a true friend. I have nothing but admiration for you and huge respect for your achievements in politics. The words seemed genuine, but they couldn't hide the political reality. Starmer had lost his deputy, his government was in crisis, and the vultures were certain. Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, pounced immediately. If Keir Starmer had a backbone, he'd have sacked Angela Rayner days ago, she said in a video posted online. This is weak leadership. He waited for a report to tell him what to do. Nigel Farage was even more brutal. He brought forward his conference speech at the Reform UK gathering in Birmingham by 3 hours to respond to the news. Angela Rayner is gone, he declared to rapturous applause. "You can't be housing secretary and dodge £40,000 of stamp duty. This Labour government is in deep crisis." He wasn't wrong. By lunchtime, Downing Street was in chaos. A resignation that should have been manageable had become a full-blown government meltdown, because Angela Rayner wasn't just any minister. She was the 8th resignation from Starmer's government in 14 months. That was more ministerial departures than any prime minister had suffered at the start of their tenure in almost 50 years. More than Boris Johnson, more than Theresa May, more than Gordon Brown. And Starmer had a 74-seat majority. He was supposed to be the safe pair of hands, the boring, competent lawyer who'd restore trust in government. Instead, his administration was hemorrhaging talent and credibility at a rate that made even his supporters nervous. The reasons behind each resignation varied. One minister quit over a transport contract scandal, another over homelessness policy disagreements, a third over anti-corruption allegations. But Angela Rayner's departure was different. She was the biggest name, the highest profile, the most politically important, and her fall revealed something deeper about Starmer's government. It had no margin for error. Labour had won in July 2024 with just 34% of the vote. Their 411 seats came from a divided opposition and a broken electoral system, not from overwhelming public enthusiasm. Starmer had never been personally popular. His approval ratings had been mediocre, even during the election campaign, and since taking office, they'd collapsed. By September 2025, he was the most unpopular prime minister in British polling history. Just 13% of people were satisfied with his performance. 79% were dissatisfied. Those numbers were worse than Boris Johnson during Partygate, worse than Liz Truss during her economic meltdown, worse than any modern British leader. And now he'd lost the person who'd helped him win, the person who connected him to working-class voters, the person who could speak to Labour's left wing when he couldn't. Angela Rayner was irreplaceable, and she was gone. The immediate political fallout was brutal. Starmer had to announce a cabinet reshuffle with just hours' notice. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, was promoted to Deputy Prime Minister. Yvette Cooper moved from Home Secretary to Housing. Shabana Mahmood became the new Home Secretary. It was a competent reshuffle, professional, but it lacked the political weight that Rayner had provided. None of these figures had her working-class credibility. None could rally Labour's grassroots like she could, and none had the personal chemistry with Starmer that had kept the party united. The media spent the weekend dissecting what had gone wrong. How had Angela Rayner, a politician known for her attention to detail on workers' rights and housing policy, made such a basic error? The answer, it turned out, was a combination of bad advice and worse judgment. Her conveyancing firm, Verico and Associates, immediately issued a statement saying they'd never given tax advice and were being made scapegoats. That was technically true. Conveyancers handle property transactions. Tax advice requires specialist counsel, but Rayner had assumed her conveyancers would flag any tax issues. They hadn't, or if they had, she'd ignored them. The trust arrangement for her disabled child complicated everything. Rayner had sold her stake in her Ashton-under-Lyne home to this trust, which meant the property was technically no longer hers. That's why she thought she didn't own multiple properties. But tax law doesn't work that way. The trust was still connected to her. The property was still in her family, and even if the legal technicalities were unclear, the optics were terrible. She was housing secretary. She should have known better. She should have sought specialist advice. She should have been more careful. But she wasn't, and that mistake cost her everything. By Monday, the political analysis shifted from what happened to what next. Labour MPs began openly discussing whether Rayner could mount a leadership challenge against Starmer from the backbenches. Any resignation is a blow. Especially Amjad, one Labour MP told reporters, but she's clearly had to go. She'll probably stay quiet for a while, but could try to challenge Starmer later. That speculation terrified Downing Street, because Angela Rayner, even in disgrace, was more popular among Labour members than Keir Starmer had ever been. If she decided to run against him, she might win. The polls told a brutal story. Reform UK was now leading nationally by 12 points. Nigel Farage was seen as more likely to be the next Prime Minister than Kemi Badenoch, and Labour was losing voters in every direction. To the Greens on the left, angry about Gaza and environmental policy, to the Liberal Democrats in the suburbs, fed up with tax rises, to Reform UK on the right, furious about immigration, and to apathy everywhere else, as disillusioned 2024 Labour voters simply gave up on politics altogether. Starmer's response was to promise phase 2 of his government, a reset, a new focus on delivery. But nobody was listening anymore. The narrative had shifted from Labour's fresh start to Labour's chaos, and Angela Rayner's resignation was the symbol of that chaos. Here was a government that had won a landslide on promises of competence, integrity, and cleaning up after Conservative corruption, and within 14 months, it had lost 8 ministers to scandals, misjudgments, and ethical breaches. The hypocrisy was staggering, but what made Rayner's fall particularly painful was how avoidable it was. She'd had 3 weeks to get ahead of the story, 3 weeks to admit the mistake, pay the tax, and move on. But she'd chosen to fight, to deny, to double down, and by the time she admitted the error, it was too late. The cover-up had become worse than the crime. Tax experts estimated she'd now face a fine of up to £12,000 from HMRC, on top of the £40,000 she owed. Not a huge amount for someone earning a ministerial salary, but the political cost was incalculable. Some Labour MPs tried to defend her by pointing to systemic issues. "This is about her accent and her background," said Peter Kyle, the Science Secretary. "If a Tory MP, who was born into wealth, had a second home, nobody would care." There was some truth to the tabloids had been particularly vicious towards Rayner, in ways they never were towards wealthy Conservative politicians. Her working-class background, her thick accent, her forthright style, all made her an easier target for certain newspapers. But that defense fell flat when people remembered her own words. She'd attacked Jeremy Hunt for the exact same thing. She demanded Nadhim Zahawi resign for the exact same thing. She couldn't credibly claim she was being victimized when she'd spent years victimizing others for identical behavior. The word that kept appearing in commentary was hypocrisy, and in politics, hypocrisy is the unforgivable sin. By mid-September, 2 weeks after the resignation, the dust still hadn't settled. Labour announced there would be a deputy leadership election in early. Angela Rayner confirmed she wouldn't stand. "I need time with my family," she said in a brief statement. Potential candidates began positioning themselves. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, was the favourite, but she was deeply unpopular with Labour's left wing. Lisa Nandy, the Education Secretary, was seen as a unity candidate, but she lacked Rayner's charisma. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, had ambition but was too divisive. None of them could replicate what Rayner had brought to the role, and that was Keir Starmer's biggest problem. He didn't just need a deputy, he needed someone who could do what Rayner had done. Bridge the gap between Labour's factions, connect with working-class voters, energize the base. Nobody in his cabinet could do all three. The longer-term implications were even more worrying for Labour. Angela Rayner's resignation wasn't just about one politician's mistake. It was about the fragility of Starmer's government, built on a fragile electoral coalition, lacking a clear ideological vision, held together by little more than "we're not the Conservatives." Labour was vulnerable to any shock, and shocks kept coming. Reform UK's conference in Birmingham was a triumph. Nigel Farage spoke to thousands of energised supporters, promising to be the next Prime Minister. Polls suggested he might be right. His party was pulling ahead, not just in national surveys, but in seat projections. Under Britain's first-past-the-post system, Reform would need a massive lead to win a majority. But they didn't need a majority to destroy Labour. They just needed to win enough seats to force a hung parliament. And that was entirely possible. Meanwhile, Jeremy Corbyn's planned new left-wing party was gaining traction. Still unnamed, still in its early stages, it nonetheless posed a serious threat to Labour's left flank. If Corbyn could attract even 5% of the national vote, he could cost Labour dozens of marginal seats. Starmer was being squeezed from both sides, and without Angela Rayner to hold the coalition together, the squeeze was getting tighter. In late September, a backbench Labour MP broke ranks. "The PM has lost his way," they told The Guardian anonymously. "We won on a platform of change, but nothing's changed. The economy's stagnant, public services are collapsing, and now we're losing our best people to scandals. Something has to give." That something might be Starmer himself. Whispers of a leadership challenge had been growing since the summer. Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, was openly positioning himself as an alternative. Popular, charismatic, working-class roots. He was everything Starmer wasn't, and he'd never forgiven Starmer for sidelining him if Labour lost the next local elections in May 2026, Burnham might make his move. Angela Rayner's resignation had made that scenario more likely. By early October, a month after the scandal, Rayner gave her first interview. Speaking to The Observer, she was reflective, angry, and defiant. "I made a mistake. I've paid the price. But let me be clear, I was advised by lawyers that I'd paid the correct amount. That advice was wrong. I accept responsibility, but I'm not a criminal." She was asked if she felt betrayed by Keir Starmer. Her pause was long. Keir had to do what he had to do. "I understand that. But did I expect more support?" Yes. Those words sent shockwaves through Labour. Rayner wasn't going quietly. She wasn't accepting her exile gracefully. She was positioning herself as the wronged woman, the sacrificial lamb, the person who'd been thrown under the bus to save Starmer's government. And increasingly, Labour members agreed with her. A YouGov poll of Labour Party members found that 58% thought Starmer had handled the situation badly. 64% wanted Rayner to return to frontline politics. 41% would support her in a future leadership contest against Starmer. Those numbers terrified Downing Street, because they suggested that far from ending Angela Rayner's political career, the scandal had only enhanced her status among the grassroots. She'd become a martyr, a symbol of working-class authenticity, crushed by the Westminster machine. And martyrs, in politics, can be very dangerous. By November, Rayner was back in Parliament, sitting on the back benches. She spoke rarely but powerfully. On housing, her former brief, she was devastating. "This government inherited a housing crisis and made it worse," she told the Commons. "We promised to build 1.5 million homes. Where are they? We promised to protect renters. Where's the legislation? We promised to end homelessness. The numbers are rising." It was a direct attack on her successor's record, a reminder that she'd had vision and passion that the new housing secretary lacked. Labour ministers squirmed in their seat because she was right. Housing policy had stalled since her departure. The new team lacked her drive, her political instincts, her connection to the issue. And the longer Angela Rayner sat on the backbenches, the more her reputation recovered. Yes, she'd made a mistake, but she'd admitted it. She'd paid the price. She'd shown humility. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer's government lurched from crisis to crisis. Economic growth was anemic. NHS waiting lists hit record highs. Immigration numbers stayed stubbornly high despite tough rhetoric. And every week brought new revelations about ministerial expenses, questionable appointments, or policy U-turns. By December 2025, just 3 months after her resignation, a remarkable shift had occurred in public opinion. Angela Rayner's favourability ratings had recovered to pre-scandal levels among Labour voters. Keir Starmer's had continued to decline. Among the general public, both were unpopular. But within Labour's membership, Rayner was now seen as the better leader by a margin of. That was extraordinary. A politician who'd resigned in disgrace was now more popular than the Prime Minister within their own party. The speculation became unavoidable. Would Angela Rayner challenge Keir Starmer for the Labour leadership? The conventional wisdom said no. You don't challenge a sitting Prime Minister. You wait for them to lose an election. But conventional wisdom had been wrong about so much in recent British politics. Brexit. Boris Johnson's victory. Corbyn's near miss in 2017. Starmer's landslide in 2024. Reform UK's rise in 2025. Nothing followed the old rules anymore. In January 2026, at a Labour Party event in Manchester, Angela Rayner gave a speech that electrified the room. She didn't mention Keir Starmer by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Labour was founded to represent working people, to give voice to those society ignores, to fight for dignity, fairness, and justice. But somewhere along the way, we forgot. We started chasing middle-class votes in marginal seats. We started obsessing over focus groups and opinion polls. We started sounding like management consultants instead of a movement. The audience roared. This was the Angela Rayner they remembered. Passionate, authentic, uncompromising. I made mistakes. I'm not perfect. But I never forgot why I'm in politics. I never forgot where I came from. And I never forgot that our job is to change people's lives, not just to win elections. The speech was a direct rebuke to Starmer's triangulation, his caution, his desperate attempts to please everyone, and satisfy no one. And it worked. Within 24 hours, 3 Labour MPs had publicly called for Rayner to return to the shadow cabinet. Within a week, grassroots groups were calling for a leadership contest. By February 2026, the situation had become untenable for Starmer. His government was in free fall. Reform UK led the polls by 15 points. Labour had lost 3 by-elections. The economy was in recession. His approval ratings were at historic lows. And now, his own deputy, expelled in disgrace, was mounting what looked increasingly like a leadership challenge. The pressure came to a head in March 2026, when Andy Burnham announced he was standing down as Manchester Mayor to return to Parliament. His intention was obvious. He wanted to position himself for a leadership bid, and if he and Angela Rayner coordinated, they could force Starmer out. The Prime Minister faced a choice: call an early election and hope to reset his mandate, or face down his internal critics and risk a messy leadership contest. He chose neither. Instead, he reshuffled his cabinet again, bringing in younger, more dynamic ministers. He launched a delivery blitz, announcing new policies every week. He tried to regain control of the narrative, but it was too late. The story was no longer about Keir Starmer's government. It was about Keir Starmer's survival, and the longer he clung on, the weaker he looked. Angela Rayner, meanwhile, was playing a long game. She didn't formally challenge Starmer. She didn't need to, she just needed to be there. On the backbenches, speaking truth to power, reminding Labour members what they'd lost when she resigned, positioning herself as the leader in waiting for when, not if, Starmer fell. The irony was perfect. Angela Rayner had resigned, in disgrace over a £40,000 tax error, but that resignation had liberated her. Free from ministerial responsibility, she could criticise the government freely. Free from the constraints of collective responsibility, she could speak her mind. Free from the need to defend Starmer's compromises, she could articulate a pure vision of Labour politics, and the more she spoke, the more people listened. By April 2026, just 7 months after her resignation, bookmakers had Angela Rayner as the favourite to be the next Labour leader. Not Starmer, not Burnham, not Reeves. Rayner, the woman who'd lost everything, had somehow positioned herself to win everything back, because in the end, Angela Rayner's scandal wasn't about tax. It was about authenticity. She'd made a mistake, but she'd admitted it. She'd paid the price. She'd shown she was human, and in an era when politicians seemed like polished robots reading focus group scripts, humanity was the most valuable commodity in politics. Keir Starmer, by contrast, had never made that emotional connection. He was competent, professional, boring, and boring doesn't win elections. When the country is falling apart, the story of Angela Rayner's resignation wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because this wasn't a story about a politician's downfall. It was a story about a phoenix rising from the ashes, a working-class woman who'd lost everything and was fighting her way back. A reminder that in politics, as in life, the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who's never failed. It's the one who has nothing left to lose. And Angela Rayner had just learned. She had nothing left to lose. September 5, 2025 was supposed to be the end of Angela Rayner's political career. It might turn out to be the beginning of her greatest chapter. As for Keir Starmer, he'd learned a brutal lesson. Winning an election is the easy part. Governing is where reputations are destroyed, and sometimes the people you sacrifice to save yourself become the ones who bring you down. Subscribe if you want to see how this story ends, because we're watching history unfold in real time. The fall of Angela Rayner, the rise of Angela Rayner, the death of Keir Starmer's government, and the rebirth of Labour's civil war. This isn't just a tax scandal. It's the beginning of the end for Britain's government, and nobody knows how it finishes.